War didn't arrive with sirens or breaking glass. It slipped into my life on polite letterhead. One friendly email from the HOA, and suddenly my quiet home, my $5 million lab, and my sanity were dragged into a battle I never saw coming. They wanted my equipment. They had no idea who they were messing with. You never expect war to start with a polite email, but that's exactly how it began. Subject line: Community Collaboration Opportunity. Sender: HOA Board, Brookstone Pines. Tone: sugar-coated threat. I read the message twice just to be sure I wasn't hallucinating. They were excited to invite me to a new initiative aimed at promoting shared innovation among homeowners, which in plain English meant they wanted access to my lab, my private custom-built workshop tucked behind my house, where I kept over $5 million worth of advanced prototyping, robotics, and additive manufacturing equipment. They called it a shared neighborhood resource. I called it my life's work. I sat back in my chair, blinking at the screen. The absurdity was almost funny. Almost. I'd moved into this corner of Brookstone Pines exactly because my parcel was legally outside the HOA's jurisdiction. Technically inside the neighborhood, but documented as an exception. An odd leftover from a zoning split decades ago. I'd verified it with 3 attorneys before buying the property. So I replied with a short, polite no. No explanation, no justification, just, "Thank you, but my equipment is private and not available for community use." Sent. Simple, clear, bulletproof. 3 days later, the first warning shot came. A note taped to my mailbox, unsigned. Neighbors support community growth. Don't be the exception. I found it passive-aggressively laminated. Rainproof idiocy. That afternoon, I got a knock on the door. A woman in her 50s stood with a clipboard and the kind of smile that could only be described as suburban passive warfare. Blonde bob, athleisure outfit, HOA badge hanging around her neck like a sheriff's star. She introduced herself as Karen Westbrook, chairwoman of the HOA board and community engagement coordinator. She said it like she expected applause. "Mr. Miller," she said, "I just wanted to have a friendly little chat about your back structure." "My lab?" I asked. "Well," she replied, "some neighbors have expressed concerns about its appearance. It's industrial looking. Doesn't match the visual harmony of the community. It's behind an 8-foot privacy fence. Even so. And I hear it contains some interesting machines. A few residents have wondered if those could benefit the whole neighborhood, especially for local school initiatives or hobbyist projects. Imagine how proud Brookstone Pines would be to be known as a hub of technological progress." "I'm not running a tech library," I said flatly. "It's private property. That includes everything inside the lab." Her smile tightened like a tourniquet. "Well, we hope you'll reconsider. It would go a long way toward reinforcing goodwill." The next morning, I received an HOA violation notice, my first ever. Unapproved exterior structure not compliant with community design guidelines. Funny, since the lab had been built and approved with permits 5 years before I moved in. The notice cited a clause that didn't apply to my parcel. I emailed back with scanned copies of my deed and zoning documents. No response. Within the week, I started getting weekly HOA mailings filled with bogus claims. Incomplete landscaping, excessive noise. I was running passive cooling fans, even a concern about possible commercial use of residential space. It was harassment paper-clipped with fake concern. Bureaucratic gaslighting. One afternoon, I noticed a man with a clipboard loitering near my property line, snapping pictures of my workshop with his phone. When I approached, he muttered something about compliance survey and wandered off. I checked with city records. There was no such survey. The next day, a delivery I hadn't ordered showed up at my door. A welcome basket from the HOA, jammed with flyers about community solidarity, and a little card. Sharing is caring. There was a granola bar on top, half melted. This wasn't just Karen being pushy. It was methodical, measured. The pressure ramped up like they were testing my thresholds. Then came the open invitation to a public HOA meeting. My name was on the agenda. The title? Discussion, encouraging responsible equipment use in the community. I didn't attend, obviously. I knew a trap when I saw one. But a neighbor texted me afterward. Apparently, Karen gave a whole presentation about how certain individuals were hoarding resources, creating a spirit of division in Brookstone Pines. My name wasn't said, but it didn't have to be. They even passed around a clipboard for community support signatures. Mob Rule, PTA edition. What struck me wasn't how absurd it all was. It was how calculated. Karen was trying to build a narrative, one where I wasn't just a stubborn guy with boundaries. I was a problem. And that's when I realized something. They weren't going to stop. This wasn't about equipment. It wasn't even about me, really. It was about control. About bending everyone to the HOA's rules, even those of us who legally stood apart. I went to the shed that night and just stood inside for a while. The hum of the machines, the gentle flicker of LEDs, the quiet perfection of gears and code. This was mine, every inch of it, paid for with late nights, debt, breakthroughs, and failures. I had bled for this place. No clipboard, no laminated threat, and certainly no Karen was going to take it from me. Let them come. The pressure didn't ease off after that first wave of warnings. It only got more creative. A week after the HOA meeting I didn't attend, I woke up to the sound of someone walking along the side of my house. Not a casual stroll. Purposeful steps, crunching gravel like they were on a mission. When I stepped outside, I caught two men wearing reflective vests snapping photos of my workshop again. Their truck had a magnetic sign reading Community Maintenance Unit, which was funny considering Brookstone Pines didn't have a maintenance unit. When I asked who sent them, they offered vague answers about routine evaluation. When I pressed harder, they climbed into the truck like cockroaches scattering from a light and drove off without another word. I checked the footage on my security system. The camera overlooking the back gate had recorded exactly 0 seconds of the encounter, just static. The night before, the log file showed a system refresh at precisely 3:21 in the morning, time-stamped and neatly attributed to my own admin credentials, which was impressive, considering I was asleep at the time and my login password was long enough to qualify as a short novel. Someone had hacked me cleanly and silently like it was nothing. I thought about Karen's little clipboard army and felt something tighten in my stomach. These people weren't just nosy. They were organized, persistent, and apparently had access to someone with actual technical skill. That made them far more dangerous than the usual suburban busybodies. 2 days later, I found a bright orange code violation notice glued to my front door like a badge of shame. Improper storage of industrial materials. Industrial materials? The only things stored outside were garden tools and a rake I hadn't touched since last fall. I called the city code office to complain, but they claimed they never issued such a notice. The woman on the phone even laughed and said, "Sounds like somebody's messing with you." The glue was so strong it took me 20 minutes to chisel the paper off. The residue is still on the door frame. That same week, a police cruiser rolled slowly past my driveway not once, not twice, but 6 separate times. On the 6th pass, the officer finally stopped. He was a tall man with a mustache that looked like it had been groomed by a committee. He introduced himself as Officer Howell and claimed he was responding to a community safety concern regarding possible dangerous equipment on the premises. I wanted to laugh in his face, but something about his tone made me hold back. It wasn't curiosity. It was rehearsed annoyance, the kind that said he didn't want to be here, but someone important wanted him here. "What's the concern exactly?" I asked. He eyed the workshop as if it might leap forward and bite him. Reports of loud mechanical noises, bright lights, neighbors worried about hazardous machinery. "Hazardous machinery?" I repeated. "This is a residential zoning exception. I have permits for everything on the property." He made a show of writing something on his notepad. "Well, perhaps you could bring your activities into compliance with community expectations." That phrase, community expectations, dripped from his mouth like he'd practiced it in front of a mirror. Something in my head clicked sharply into place. Karen. Of course. She had gotten to him, or someone above him, and greased whatever wheels needed greasing. I didn't accuse him of anything right then. No point. You don't pick a fistfight with a brick wall. Instead, I took his card, smiled just enough to appear civil, and watched him leave. He drove slowly past my workshop like he was inspecting it for weak spots. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that tasted like burnt battery acid. I spread out every notice, letter, and photograph I'd collected since this whole circus began. It was an impressive stack, like a scrapbook documenting my gradual descent into HOA hell. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't paranoia. They were escalating. The fake notices, the hacked cameras, the police involvement. All of it pointed to intent. And then came the cherry on top. The next morning, I walked out to check my mail and found a new letter from the HOA stuffed into the box, sticking out like a tongue. The return address label had a small embossed icon of two open hands holding a house, a symbol that would have been comforting if it weren't being used by people who behaved like a cult with clipboards. Inside was a 3-page formal notice outlining penalties for my continued refusal to cooperate with community programs. The bolded section read, "Your unwillingness to share resources is creating division within Brookstone Pines. Participation is expected for the greater good." Expected, not requested anymore. Expected. Near the bottom was the real threat. Failure to comply may result in further action. No definition of further action, of course. Leaving it vague was the point. Fear through ambiguity. But the most interesting part wasn't the threat. It was the timing. The letter had been dropped into my box sometime between 3 and 4 in the morning. My door camera caught motion, but no visible figure, as if the person had known exactly where the camera's blind spot was. Someone was coaching them. By the end of the week, it wasn't just harassment. It was a coordinated pressure campaign. And the only reason to apply that much pressure was simple. They wanted something badly. Bad enough to tiptoe right up to the line of criminal behavior. That night, as I checked the locks around the property, I thought about the message under all the noise. Karen wasn't trying to convince me anymore. She thought she could corner me. That I'd give in if they pushed hard enough. That eventually I'd crack and hand over access to millions of dollars worth of equipment just to make the harassment stop. But she didn't understand people like me. I don't break under pressure, I calcify. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that sometimes the best way to bait a predator is to play injured. I needed to change tactics. For weeks I'd been reactive, dodging punches, patching holes, answering threats with logic. But logic doesn't work on people like Karen. She was running a campaign and I was the target. The more I resisted, the more it justified her crusade. So I decided to give her exactly what she wanted, or at least let her believe she was getting it. I announced it in the next HOA newsletter, just a short blurb submitted voluntarily. I wrote, "Excited to share that I've agreed to lend a few of my legacy systems from the workshop for the benefit of the community." Legacy systems, a beautiful phrase. It sounded generous but vague, outdated, harmless. I let Karen marinate in that for a few days before staging the real performance, with help from a trusted contractor, a guy named Manny who owed me a favor after I helped his nephew get into a robotics program. I loaded up a few crates from the shed and delivered them to the HOA's community center. Old printers, a disassembled soldering station, a CNC router with half its firmware corrupted. I even tossed in a Raspberry Pi running a fake diagnostics loop. Of course, what I didn't mention was that two of those items, a desktop server and the router housing, were wired with discrete audio and visual surveillance hardware. Low-frequency transmitters, self-powered, nearly undetectable unless you were actively scanning for RF anomalies. And why would anyone do that in a gifted donation? I called it the Trojan trash. The next day, Karen sent out an HOA-wide thank you note praising my change of heart and describing me as an example of civic generosity. I nearly vomited reading it. From that point on, I kept my head down and let them believe they'd won a little battle. I stopped pushing back publicly. I smiled and waved when I passed Karen in the neighborhood. I even answered one of her emails with a thanks for the update, complete with a smiley face. The disgust nearly liquefied my keyboard. Meanwhile, I got to work tracking where the real money was moving. With the help of Aiden, a friend of mine who freelanced in cybersecurity, we started watching the metadata of HOA documents, domain registrations, and internal emails. Aiden ran a scraper across the HOA's website and pulled archived documents that should have been deleted months ago. That's where we found the real lead. A set of maintenance invoices billed to Brookstone Community Services, LLC. That LLC didn't exist in any county registry. Its address led to a UPS store. We traced its listed bank routing number to a commercial account flagged for irregular cash flow. It was receiving quarterly transfers from the HOA's operating budget, tens of thousands of dollars labeled vendor services. But the so-called vendor had no phone number, no reviews, no employees listed on LinkedIn, nothing. It was a ghost shell. And that's when I realized what was happening. The HOA wasn't just squeezing me for my equipment. They were laundering money through the association. Inflated service contracts, fake consulting fees, security audits that never happened. And based on the timeline, the escalation toward me had coincided perfectly with a sharp increase in HOA budget reallocations. I was the jackpot, the final big score. A few nights later, I got my first real break. The router I donated, the one wired with the microcam, captured a grainy but perfectly audible recording of Karen speaking to someone in the community center office. "We're almost done clearing out that equipment. He's lucky he didn't make this harder. Keep the inventory moving. Split it between both units. I don't want any red flags on the books." Inventory. My blood went cold. They weren't talking about the fake stuff. They were talking about the real thing, my actual lab equipment, which, according to everything I could see, was still sitting in my shed. Except now I couldn't be sure. I went out back that night well past midnight and opened the main door to the workshop. Everything looked fine. Everything was in place, nothing obviously missing. But I had a terrible feeling, like walking into your apartment and knowing someone had touched your things. It was a smell, a silence that didn't belong. I decided to make the next move before they did. First, I updated my security. Not just stronger passwords and firmware locks, but air-gapped backups and motion-triggered local alarms that didn't rely on Wi-Fi. Then I encrypted the remaining critical devices. Without the decryption key stored off-site and fragmented across 3 drives, they were nothing but stylish paperweights. I wasn't paranoid anymore. I was planning for war. Then I got a call from Aiden. "You're gonna love this," he said. "Remember that ghost company? Guess who signed the Articles of Incorporation? Don't say Karen. Not directly. But the registered agent is someone named Jordan Westbrook. Her son, 19 years old, supposedly a college student. On paper, the owner of a contracting company funneling over $100,000 through a single HOA account in the past 12 months. They weren't just stealing. They were laundering through family. I stood in the dark, listening to the hum of my encrypted machines. The next time they came, they'd find nothing but blinking lights and silent fury. Let them make their move. I was ready. It happened on a Tuesday morning. A Tuesday, for God's sake. The most boring, unsuspicious day of the week. I walked out back with a mug of coffee and a to-do list in my head, only to find the heavy steel door to my workshop cracked open. I froze mid-step. That door had a triple deadbolt system, industrial grade. It didn't just crack open. I dropped the mug. Glass shattered, coffee splattered across the concrete, but I didn't hear it. My ears were full of silence. Thick, unnatural silence. The kind that comes right before a scream. I pushed the door open slowly. Gone. All of it. Every single goddamn piece. The 3D printers. Gone. The robotic arms. Gone. The custom servers. The power tools. My precision scanner. My AI integrated diagnostic system. Even the wire racks and workbenches. Everything had vanished. They hadn't just taken the valuables. They'd gutted the place like a butcher strips a carcass. I stumbled forward, stepping on the empty outlines of dust where machines used to sit. The air smelled wrong, like ozone and disinfectant. Like whoever did this didn't just want to rob me. They wanted to erase me. I opened the wall panel that housed the security system. Everything had been reset, not disabled. Reset. As if the system had never existed. Logs gone, no alerts sent, no backups triggered. I ran inside and checked my off-site server. Nothing, no emergency pings, no motion alerts, just blank time where data should have been. Aiden's encrypted failsafe had also been wiped. The upload never triggered. Somehow they'd managed to walk right through my best defenses and erase their footprints as they went. I called Aiden. "Tell me you've got something," I snapped. Static. Then, "Jesus Christ, I'm looking, wait, hold on. Your camera logs, they got scrubbed clean, not just deleted, overwritten, rebuilt." Rebuilt? They didn't just cover their tracks, they faked new ones. That's high level. I didn't even respond. I was already walking out to the street. Maybe someone saw something. Maybe there was a neighbor walking a dog, a late-night jogger, a delivery van. But Brookstone Pines was dead silent, pristine, manicured lawns and perfect mailboxes like nothing had ever happened. I called the police. Officer Howell showed up, of course. The same damn mustache, the same bored look, the same subtle smirk like he was watching a rerun. He took one look at the empty workshop and wrote something in his little notebook, then asked if I might have loaned the equipment and forgotten. I nearly lost it. You think I forgot I had $5 million worth of machinery stolen? "Well," he said, "there's no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, no footage. Not much I can do without evidence." "You're standing in the evidence." "I'm standing in an empty room," he said. It was a performance, a bad one. I didn't even bother arguing. I just took out my phone and filmed the entire interaction. Slow pans of the empty floor, a close-up of his smirk, his badge number. "Smile," I said. "You're going to be a star." That wiped the smirk off fast. The official report he filed. No evidence of unlawful entry, possible insurance matter. And wouldn't you know it? When I contacted my insurance company, they informed me that due to the lack of physical damage or camera proof, the claim would be under investigation for fraudulent filing. I nearly choked. Karen, of course, appeared the next morning, like a ghost that smelled opportunity. She came strolling up my driveway, clutching a latte and fake concern. "I heard about your loss," she said, her voice thick with sympathy syrup. "So tragic. We were all just talking about how much the community appreciated your contribution. It's such a shame." "I never contributed anything to you," I snapped. Her lips twitched. "Oh, but you did, whether you meant to or not. Sometimes being part of a community means understanding that what's yours can help everyone." That's when I knew. She did this. Maybe not with her own hands, but she'd pulled the strings. She had the means, the motive, and the smug face of someone who thought she'd finally won. But she'd made one mistake. She assumed I was beaten. I called Aiden back. "I need full reconstruction mode, deep forensics. Anything they missed. I don't care how small." He was already ahead of me. "I found a glitch." Aiden pulled a scrap of corrupted data from one of the local surveillance caches. A half-second blip. Grainy, jumpy, but clear enough. A white utility van parked at the end of my street at 2:30 a.m. No markings, no plates. But we enhanced the image and caught something. A small decal on the back bumper. A faded logo that read Sterling Systems, Technical Maintenance Division. That company didn't exist, but the logo matched one I'd seen before, on a van parked outside Karen's house 2 weeks ago. We were back in the game. The next few days blurred into a haze of quiet fury. I barely slept. I didn't eat much. I just sat in front of my monitors, headphones on, eyes scanning through security logs, vendor databases, city permits, anything that might connect Karen and her HOA mob to that ghost van. Aiden was a machine. He barely spoke, just sent messages like bullets. Plate scanners from nearby intersections, lists of companies registered under shell addresses, deleted HOA meeting minutes he'd scraped from cached browser data. Then came the break. We traced a delivery invoice from Sterling Systems, supposedly a defunct tech services firm, to a warehouse rental unit on the outskirts of town. Rented under a fake name, paid in cash, but the surveillance footage from the strip mall 2 lots over caught a familiar figure unlocking the gate. Jordan Westbrook, Karen's son. This kid was 19, allegedly studying marketing at a community college, and somehow had keys to a property used to fence industrial-grade equipment. Cute. I didn't call the cops. Not this time. Officer Howell and his broom mustache could rot. Instead, I called someone who actually gave a damn, a private investigator named Alan Walker. Former military intel, clean cut, no nonsense. Carried a notebook and a Glock, and I wasn't sure which one he preferred to use. I brought Alan up to speed. Equipment value, circumstances, suspected collusion with the HOA, the fake company, the stolen lab. He just listened, took notes, nodded, then said, "Let's follow the money. These people think they're clever, they're not." Within a week, Alan had photos of HOA meetings held off-site at a downtown steakhouse, receipts of large transfers between the HOA Treasury and Jordan's LLC, and, my personal favorite, a partial voice recording from Karen's Bluetooth headset while she walked through a Target parking lot, bragging about how the garage freak finally cracked. Still not enough for court, but enough for pressure. That's when I made my move. I showed up at the next HOA board meeting. The room fell silent when I walked in. Karen's smile twitched, a muscle spasm betraying the calm facade. "I was under the impression these meetings were open to residents," I said loudly, knowing full well my property wasn't technically under HOA jurisdiction. "Unless you're planning to change that without a vote, of course." No one stopped me. I took a seat in the back and waited. The meeting dragged on about flower bed regulations and mailbox colors, all while Karen kept darting glances my way like I might leap up and recite her list of crimes. Then came new business. I raised my hand. "I'd like to ask about a contractor named Sterling Systems." HOA funds were paid to them last quarter, yes? Murmurs. Karen's face paled just slightly. I'm only asking because they don't appear in any city registry and the building they operate out of seems to be connected to your son. Now the room really woke up. Karen tried to brush it off, said something about vendor privacy and outsourced compliance work, but the damage was done. People were whispering, scrolling on their phones, exchanging looks. I left before it turned into a circus. Let the paranoia fester. 2 nights later, I was back in the new lab, a small rented space downtown that I was slowly setting up while the insurance circus dragged on, when the fire alarm went off. It wasn't a drill. I smelled smoke before I saw it. Sharp, chemical, angry. I ran to the side door and yanked it open to a wall of heat. Flames were already licking up the side of my new server stack. The sprinklers kicked in just in time to keep it from spreading, but by then it was too late. Half the room was scorched. I stood there, soaked, coughing, watching my equipment hiss and die all over again. The fire marshal said the point of origin was suspicious. Said it looked like it started behind one of the server racks, as if something had been planted. Accelerant residue confirmed it. Arson. I didn't want to believe it at first. I wanted it to be faulty wiring, a freak short. But then the fire marshal handed me a piece of melted plastic they'd found near the ignition point. Half melted, curved. It was a gift tag, burned around the edges but still legible. No hard feelings. K. That's when something inside me broke, not with rage but with clarity. Karen hadn't just stolen from me. She hadn't just lied, manipulated, laundered, or hacked. She'd declared war. And she'd escalated it beyond property or money. She'd made it personal. So now it was my turn. I sat in the wreckage of that lab, surrounded by smoke and silence, and I started making calls. Not just to Alan, not just to Aiden. I called lawyers, auditors, journalists, state regulators. I opened every file, shared every document, every video, every audio snippet. I gave them everything. I didn't want revenge. I wanted a reckoning. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Not the temperature, the atmosphere. Bleached walls, buzzing fluorescence, a faint scent of paper and worn leather, the kind of place that had seen too many people like me. Exhausted, scorched, dragging behind them the weight of justice like a sled through wet sand. But I wasn't here to beg. I was here to bury them. Karen sat across the aisle at the defense table, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they'd spent more time on their hair than on the case. She wore a beige blazer and that same smug serenity she'd weaponized for months, but it was cracked now, like someone had carved hairline fractures into her composure. Her son, Jordan, was 2 seats down, staring at the floor like it owed him something. I took the stand on day 2. My lawyer, a beast of a woman named Rivera, had me walk through everything. From the first email to the fire, the threats, the notices, the fake company, the hacked systems. She laid it all out with surgical precision, guiding the jury like a seasoned storyteller, never pushing too hard, never letting them drift. Then she played the tape, Karen's voice clear and sharp, talking about clearing out the equipment and keeping the inventory moving. Then the recording from her headset where she bragged about the garage freak breaking. And finally the kicker, the security footage of Jordan unlocking the rental warehouse. The jury shifted in their seats. A few stared at Karen like they'd just discovered a snake in a garden party. Karen's lawyer tried to play it down, claimed it was all circumstantial, that I was overreacting to perceived slights from a well-meaning HOA board. He even suggested the donation I made, my fake legacy systems, had been a sign of voluntary compliance, not coercion. Then Rivera brought out the audit. Thanks to Alan and Aiden, we'd traced every dime, HOA funds flowing into Jordan's shell company, then being rerouted into personal accounts. Luxurious purchases, vacations, a down payment on a Tesla Model X, all off HOA money, and some from renting out stolen tech equipment to third-party contractors in other states. Then came the fire report. The fire marshal testified that the accelerant was commercial grade, the ignition point deliberate. The melted plastic gift tag was entered into evidence, along with handwriting analysis tying it directly to Karen. And just when it seemed like they might still weasel out, just when I saw that slimy grin creep back onto Karen's face during a recess, Rivera delivered the final blow. A surprise witness, a former board member, Jessica Tran, petite, nervous but furious. She'd resigned months before the theft but had seen enough before walking away. She testified that Karen had bragged about using the HOA like a personal ATM and had discussed clearing out Miller's junk once he became a problem. Karen exploded in the middle of court, called Jessica a liar, accused her of sleeping with that tech guy, meaning me, I guess, and had to be physically calmed by her own attorneys. The judge called for a recess while Karen hissed something that sounded like a death threat. It was beautiful. The trial lasted a full 2 weeks. The local media picked it up by day 4. By week's end, there were people standing outside with signs, HOA Mafia must go, free the lab, and one guy with a t-shirt that just read, Karen burned it all. The verdict came swiftly. Karen was found guilty of conspiracy to commit theft, fraud, criminal mischief, intimidation, and obstruction. Jordan got nailed for financial fraud, accessory to theft, and tax evasion. Officer Howell, who'd been quietly dismissed from the force mid-trial, was now under federal investigation. Aiden's deep dive revealed falsified police reports linked to multiple HOA cases in the region. The judge's decision was almost poetic. Karen, 6 years in prison, no parole for 4. Jordan, 3 years in federal prison plus restitution. The HOA, disbanded under court order, its remaining funds seized and redirected toward reparations. Brookstone Pines placed under third-party community management. And me? I was awarded $6.3 million, damages, losses, mental anguish, and the estimated market value of my stolen and destroyed equipment. When the judge read the number aloud, Karen's jaw actually dropped. I don't think she'd ever heard a dollar amount that didn't belong to her. I walked out of that courthouse into a sea of flashing cameras, shouting reporters, and clapping neighbors. People I hadn't spoken to in months were suddenly shaking my hand, thanking me for standing up to them. Some were just happy the HOA was gone. But I didn't smile for the crowd. I smiled because I'd finally pulled the root out of the ground. The whole thing, not just Karen. Not just the board, the corrupt cop, the fake vendors, the hidden money, all of it, exposed to daylight and burned down to ash. The war was over. Now I could rebuild. 6 months later, I threw a barbecue. Not just any barbecue, the first annual Freedom from HOA cookout, held right on the front lawn of my fully restored HOA-free home. The smoker ran hot from noon to midnight. Brisket, ribs, grilled corn, and enough beer to drown a small town. I invited everyone, even the ones who used to sign those HOA concern letters. Most of them showed up sheepishly, bringing pie and folding chairs, acting like we'd always been friends. I didn't hold a grudge, not publicly anyway. After what we'd all been through, a little selective amnesia was the closest thing to peace. The new lab stood in the backyard like a monument, sleeker, smarter, more secure. Biometric locks, independent power, AI-monitored perimeter. I even named it Phoenix 1. Seemed fitting. Inside, young minds buzzed around machines I used to build alone. Interns, grad students, hobbyists, all working together. I'd turned the settlement into something real. A nonprofit tech incubator for kids with big ideas and nowhere to build them. I paid the bills, They built the future. It felt clean. Aiden still helped with the infrastructure. Alan dropped by sometimes, usually with stories about other HOA disasters brewing across the state. He was thinking of starting a podcast. One afternoon, I hung something in the lab, a warped, half-melted plaque pulled from the wreckage of the fire, the plastic gift tag. No hard feelings. K. Underneath it, I added a label with my own Sharpie. Wrong again.